Good morning. I am Dave Klee. We're back in the 613 Dive Lab. I've still got the coffee. It's early. And up next, we're going to talk about the awesome dive season we had back in 2024. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. And let's talk about the 2024 dive season that we had here at 613 Dive. It was a pretty jam-packed year. It was probably the busiest dive season I've had personally in terms of the amount of diving that got done. And then, of course, I had the instructor side of things, which sort of also got fairly busy for me over the course of the summer. So I will say anyone looking or have some interest in terms of becoming a dive instructor, my own experience is do it. If you have any inclination at some point to want to teach, it's a great journey. It's not an easy journey, but it is a great journey, and it's a very rewarding journey. All right, so definitely would encourage folks to go ahead and start to go down that process. I've already said before, I waited. I'm glad I waited, but at the same time, that's just a personal preference in terms of gaining how much experience you think is actually needed. Number two to that is, you've got the certification. Now you got to learn how to teach. I had a little bit of teaching experience from the corporate side of things in my day life, but it didn't really translate over in terms of the diving. And so last year I had to really sort of find my own way to teach and become an instructor, and that's still evolving. And so I look forward to 2025 and continuing to gain that experience as an instructor. So from an instructor schedule perspective at the moment, I've got a few things in the pipeline. It's not super busy. I do have a extremely packed personal dive schedule in 2025, but I will certainly make time in 2025 to teach the PADI recreational side of diving. All right. Okay, let's talk a little bit about student number one at 613 Dive, Mr. Wayne Giffen. It was a fun summer, buddy. I know you reached out very quickly after I posted on the Facebook group. Great to see the Facebook group membership growing. That's pretty awesome to see. And Mr. Wayne, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it because, I put the ad out and almost right away you kind of responded and we managed to kick off a peak performance buoyancy course. So had a ton of fun diving and learning and working with you last summer. We did a few courses and, you really progressed. I know we'll be back in the water together in 2025 as soon as the water is tolerable, buddy. From all the courses, the one that amazes me the most in terms of how quickly students progress is the dry suit course. I had a few courses last year in the dry suit side where I was like, okay, we're going to need another day of diving after dive number one. And it just became a bit of a consistent theme as I taught that course more and more, that the progression between dive one and dive three is actually quite amazing. Dive one, the students are almost dragging themselves down the slope to the platform. And you know what? By the time dive three hits, it's quite shocking to see how quickly the progression happens. So I think, I enjoy teaching all of the courses. I think the dry suit course, the progression is still quite amazing to me. So that one was certainly enjoyable to witness. So shout out to everyone who did a dry suit course with me. As everyone knows, I love diving dry suit. I will dive dry suit for here on out until I can no longer dive dry suit. And I know that's a bit of a running joke with some of the folks who know me because back in the day, I said, there's no way in hell I would ever wear a dry suit. And here we are. And so, yes, dry suit for sure is a fun course to teach, and I love diving dry suit. All right, so the other thing that stood out to me in terms of the instructing back in 2024 was I had the privilege of teaching, instructing, and diving with Miss Sophia, who was a 12-year-old student. It was I would say it was a tough 2 days, challenging 2 days for both of us. I had to sort of find a new style in terms of how I worked with her. But by the end, man, it was super rewarding to see her with her arms out at the platform with me, and we were just sort of, trimmed out, buoyant. It was all looking pretty good. So very rewarding experience for me. Shout out to Miss Sophia. I hope you're doing well. Last highlight I want to chat about is George and the Mask. And George, I know you're going to watch this, and I know you and I have chatted about this in terms of talking about the experience. So thank you for allowing me to share. George came to me back in August as a new open water student. I think George had a trip planned to Hawaii in 2025, and so wanted to get his scuba certification done. So we did our first pool session in the confined pool, of course. Shout out to KDS for the pool session. And right away, we struggled with the mask. And I mean, really struggled with the mask. The whole clearing, the whole connection of the nose, breathing out, all of that did not go so well. And at some point, we had to move on, and we had to go on to, get some other skills done. But by the end of day one, I was not exactly confident that George was coming back. I'm just going to put it out there, George. And because he really struggled. Now, we did give him a few takeaways to go work on, and I think we did take a week or a 2-week period off in between. And, basically, the message was go buy your own mask, find a way to work, and just practice. I don't care. I said, if you're standing in the shower, I don't care if you're in someone's pool or their hot tub, but just find a way to sort of learn how to breathe, exhale through the nose with the mask on. And off he went. And I think our next pool session, which would have been probably, I don't think we had finished everything in day one, but the next pool session, right away, we start to hit the mask skills. And I could see, he had a little bit more of a confident walk to the pool. And I was like, oh, okay, I feel like he's been practicing. And sure enough, thankfully, George, you put the time in. And I could tell right away you were way more confident on that whole technique. And so we managed to get through our confined pool. So shout out to George and the hard work I knew it took, because I knew that was a bit stressful for you. And so George and the mask story is a good story, because we managed to finish up our open water course, I think early October. It was a bit cold. It was certainly a bit cold, but we did manage to get George through. And that is a real example of why I like to teach one-on-one, because really there was no clock. We could take a few extra days if we needed it, and we could work with a student to get them through these kind of skills, right? Because everyone learns at a little bit of a different pace, and everyone has a few different stresses that they're bringing into these courses with them, right? And so shout out to George. That was a good learning lesson for me. I had to definitely learn to be a bit more patient. And but I'm super proud of the fact that you went back, you took what I told you, and you found a way to go practice, and then you came back even better. So nice work. Okay, so up next is Liberty time. I managed somehow to get a ton of time on my Liberty rebreather, and I guess that's probably why I have so many kilometers on the dive truck, because it's indicative of a very busy dive season. So it's just something that I continue to work on. I'm still working every day to become a better Liberty rebreather diver. It's a lot going on. It's its own kind of beast when you're learning. But at this point, I'm looking forward to a very exciting 2025 and getting a new certification or two on the Liberty rebreather. So stay tuned for the 2025 plans. Okay, so up next, side mount experience. First, let's put the disclaimer out there, because I don't want people to think online, as a look at Dave Klee, he's got 50, 60 side mount dives, all of a sudden he thinks he's an instructor. That's not the case. Listen, I am not a side mount instructor. I am not here to tell you how to side mount. I am not telling you I am a side mount guru. There are tons of side mount gurus and instructors in our local diving community. I am not one of them. All right. I am simply going to share what my side mount experience was like as a new side mount diver last year. So, I basically had some interest in side mount back in 2022, but I had kind of put that on the back shelf because I was still learning back mounts and some of the tech stuff, and I didn't want to sort of overcomplicate things. So side mount had to take a back seat. But as I've started to progress through my cave diving, it's pretty apparent that at some point I will end up in a side mount setup for a rebreather. And so it might be a conversion kit for the Liberty sitting behind me, or it might be a completely separate side mount system. I don't know, but I know it's coming. All right. I know someone who would say you picked the right tool for the job.
Steph, does that sound familiar?
And so for me, I thought in 2024, I would like to go back to open circuit side and learn side mount from that perspective, as then I can start to progress into, at some point, being a side mount Liberty rebreather or whatever the system is, a diver. I managed to get all the gear, and the gear is not cheap. I quickly realized that really nothing in my current setup of gear kind of translated easily into a side mount setup. So I just decided I'm going to buy everything new and basically put together a completely separate side mount setup that does not change, back and forth between parts. And then I had to figure out how to put it all together. And shout out to Steve L. Steve L., if you're watching this, man, I really appreciate the time. You gave me a day of your time at Centene Park. I basically showed up with a box of side mount gear in the back of my truck, all new stuff, and you worked with me and put it all together and got it to the point where it was ready to dive. And then we went and spent, I don't know, I think we did 1 or 2 dives that day. And you basically got me to the point where I was pretty comfortable in the setup. It needed a ton of tweaks and personalization. But by the time the end of that day was, I could dive side mount. And then I knew and then you knew probably that I was just going to put a ton of time in on it. And so that experience for side mount is something that if you have any interest, I would just tell you, just do it. All right, go find an instructor and really take the time to learn how to be a side mount diver. It is a very unique experience in terms of how it feels. It almost feels like there's no equipment sort of on you. It's very close. All right. So I think I mentioned it in my Facebook post that it is a very cool feeling of freedom when you're diving. And then if you already have decent buoyancy and trim skills, you are going to realize that, boy, you are very efficient in the water column in terms of the finning. It does not require a ton of energy in order to move forward. So overall, it was a very, very amazing experience. And like I said, Steve, thank you so much for your time. You really got me started in the right way. So I am sure we have some amazing local side mount instructors in our community. I am not in the side mount sort of circles, but I do know of 2 that are extremely good instructors. I know Dustin Proper out of Proper Diving. He is an instructor who is very active in our community, has a ton of diving experience from when he was young, and is an accomplished cave diver and is obviously an accomplished side mount diver and instructor. So I would highly encourage you to sort of take a visit to his website, reach out if you have any interest in side mount diving. The other person I would recommend for my own personal experience on the tech side, not side mount, but learning some tech stuff, is Dan Mason out of EPSO. Shout out to Mr. Dan. I know we got to dive at least once last year. That was pretty cool. Appreciate it. And you were actually teaching a side mount course. And so for anyone really interested, I would highly encourage you to reach out to either of those 2 folks to talk about side mount. And so for me, I was on the fence. I did a trip to Bonaire with Wendy with the Scuba 2000 folks back in late October in 2024. And I was on the fence about, should I take my Liberty setup, because that was going to be a bit of a pain to travel with, but I really wanted to. Or I was like, well, do I take a week and just purely focus on side mount diving? And I ended up going with the side mount setup, rented 2 tanks down there. And I have to say, it was awesome for a week to just focus on side mount diving. The shore diving I thought would be a bit of a pain, but it was not. It was actually quite easy. And the amount of freedom and flexibility that side mount setup gave me in those shore dives was awesome. So I have nothing but great things to say about side mount. I wish I'd learned it sooner. And it is certainly something I'm going to keep pursuing in 2025. So I'm going to call this next segment Chasing the Leak. And for at least half of last season, I chased a leak on my 4th element. In fact, I would say leaks. It started off as a wet left arm and progressed into a wet left arm with a wet chest. And then that chest became really bad. And by the time midsummer hit, it was almost a semi-dry dry suit, which is not cool. I will say that's my second 4th element dry suit. I will not own another 4th element dry suit. My experience with the suit itself, I mean, it's a great fit. It dives nice, and I love the pockets, but it was frustrating for me. To their credit, I had my first 4th element had seams falling off, and I still had a zipper issue, and they warranted the whole thing and sent me a new one. Now, it took a fair bit to get a new one, like in terms of time, but it is custom, and it is a nice fitting dry suit. But after about 150 dives on the second one, I started to have leak issues again. And man, I chased that leak for, at least half the summer, trying my best to figure it out. It was not an issue through the course of summer because the water is warm, so it's not too bad. But I knew at some point, because the water is going to get cold, I needed a better dry suit. And so I eventually said, that's it, I'm done with the 4th element. And so I had found a bunch of pinholes which were causing all the leaks across the chest. And so at that point, I had to make a decision. Do I replace the zipper, which after some investigation was at least 3-4 months in terms of backlog work around here. So, that was not going to work because I needed a dry suit. And so at that point, I was talking to Mr. Hatch. Shout out to Mr. Hatch. And he shared a bunch of the Seaskin info for his new dry suit that he got. And it looked nice. the price was right. And while I love sending business locally to our dive shops, in this case, I went online and I ordered a Seaskin. And so I'm not going to cover the Seaskin other than to say that I'm slightly over 100 dives on it and I have no issues, touch wood. But again, we'll let you know how that goes, and I will do a separate probably segment on my dry suit experience. All right. All right. Up next, the highlight from 2024 is I had the privilege of working with DM1 and DM2. So shout out to Jen and Jeff, Dive Master 1 and 2 for 613 Dive. We worked through the PADI Dive Master program together last year, and it was a ton of work. Shout out to every instructor who teaches the Dive Master program. I now have a newfound respect for the amount of effort it takes to teach a Dive Master program. And they worked hard. It was a lot of work, a lot of fun. We did a lot of laughing. And at the end of last season, they both got through it with their certification. So congrats to both of you. It was well earned. And it sounds like we might have a Dive Master 3 in the making. Just saying. All right, the last highlight I'm going to share for 2024, and it's probably the most important for me, at least the most rewarding, is seeing Reese progress as a diver. We got to hang out and dive a ton last year, and that was extremely cool. It really reminded me back of the days I was free diving with my dad back in the Bahamas. And so, Reese, you put a ton of time in. You flipped the switch. The commitment level went way up. I know up until 2024, the first 2 dive seasons, you were not as committed, and it just wasn't a primary focus. But I think, we put you in a dry suit very early on last year. Shout out to KDSU Sail. And we found a bear that fit reasonably well. Now, I know day 1 of the dry suit course was very stressful for me and you. And I know it resulted in a quiet drive home that day. But we got past it. And I also remember a day where we got to Centene Park, unloaded the truck, and someone, I'm not naming any names, Reese, forgot his dry suit. So again, another quiet ride home. But, over the course of last summer, you really put the time in. Man, you put a lot of commitment in, you put a lot of practice time in, and it very quickly you progressed as a diver. And so for me, that was great because by the time we had some great dives by the end of last fall, I was no longer diving with my son. I was just diving with a really good dive buddy who I knew had everything with him to sort of take care of himself if something happened. So for me, that brings the stress levels way down. I know you have some cool stuff planned for 2025. I'll let you share that on the podcast when we get you on here. But overall, great job. I had a ton of fun diving with you. And it was great to see the progression. So keep up the great work. And so, yeah, that didn't work out so well. You picked the right tool for the right job. What is it? Steph, does that sound familiar? All right, and the last highlight I'm just going to share with you guys is I'm going to share you the frog in the throat. It's one of the mornings. Dry suit nav? No. Please keep watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Let's take a coffee. See, we didn't even do the disclaimer. I mean, you want to talk about side mount? You're not even an instructor. Where's the disclaimer?